Jo-Ann, here we are, a couple of days out from International Women's Day, and we're on what I think is going to be a super fun conversation that a lot of people have signed up for. So if you are tuning in, I am Dana McCauley. I'm the CEO of the Canadian Food and Innovation Network, and we're really just going to have, I don't know, almost like a podcasty kind of an hour of just sort of talking about International Women's Day, what it means, and what should it mean, and yeah, just hopefully, I don't know, hopefully servicing some lessons learned from a couple of people who've been in the food business for a while. So hopefully there'll be some useful takeaways for those of you who have joined us. A few little housekeeping things. Fun fact. Your name hasn't officially been changed to Donna Marie. Donald Trump has not made that an official requirement of any trade agreements with Canada. That is just a technical problem that we have today. So the good news is there really is a Donna Marie, and she's awesome. So if you go through this webinar with an avatar that says Donna Marie, good for you. You're representing a wonderful working mom. The other thing that those of you who want to experience the webinar in a different language, you just have to go up to the top right-hand section there where it says Custom Live Streaming Service. Go to the drop down and it'll lead you to a Wordly app that will help you to use this tool in whatever language you choose, whether it be in Canada's other official language, French, or one that you're more familiar with and like to use. Thanks to everybody who has signed in so far. I know we have about 215, 230 people signed up from across the country, and that is kind of amazing because you have lots of other things you could do. So thanks so much for your interest and for being here. And especially thank you to Jo-Ann McArthur, who is joining me. Jo-Ann is someone who I intersected with, I guess, for the first time over a decade ago, or about a decade ago, when I was running Food Starter, and became really obvious that we had such similar interests, very different backgrounds in how we got to similar interests. But I, for many, many years, worked really diligently in the food trend space. And as I sort of moved into economic development and entrepreneurship and let that go, it was great to see someone like Jo-Ann kind of filling the void and taking it to new heights in her own way. So thank you so much, Jo-Ann, for joining me today. This is going to be fun.
Absolutely. Always fun to spend time with you, Dana.
Well, thank you so much. So I'll give you guys a little bit of background on Jo-Ann. She comes from, a real brand background. She worked for Molson as a senior executive, Procter & Gamble, Unilever, and she even had a stint in the real estate world at Cadillac Fairview, something we've never talked about, so I actually didn't even really realize that. But it's amazing how, despite all those really big businesses that you were involved in, that you've been so drawn to entrepreneurship with Nourish Marketing, something that you have created, I think, a really interesting offering, and that you seem to be extremely, passionate about, and to have really flourished in. And I think that's a really interesting place to maybe even start our conversation. Like, were you enduring corporate world, just pining to be an entrepreneur, or did it lead you to entrepreneur? Like, is there some connection, some bridge between the two?
Yeah, I guess you could say it came out of frustration in a way for never getting the agency that I wanted when I was at
Even as a divisional president.
Yeah. So every year, you'd bring in, we had a number of agencies, right? So we'd bring in all our agencies and I'd give them the same little talk about this new thing called social media and how, our big season.
How resistant corporations were?
It was crazy, right? Now, granted, this was like more than 15 years ago, but it was like head in the sand. And, we're selling most, beer is seasonal. So we were selling to mostly young males in the summer. And guess what? They're not in front of a TV. They're on a dock. They're on this new screen thing that's, two-way. And they kept coming back with what I've since learned is the SUV of the ad agency, which is the big TV commercial. It's going to win them awards. It's sexy. It's all these things, but it doesn't sell beer. So that was my frustration, and started. It wasn't actually even called Nourish. It was called Fisheye, and it was a digital first agency.
That's
But
right. I forgot about
yeah,
Fisheye. That's what it was when I met you.
yes, and we won our first food client, who we still have to this day. I'm very proud of that, and because I'd spent my career in food and beverage, it was an area I was, very comfortable in, loved. And decided to kind of dive into the deep end and open a test kitchen and a chef and food stylist and a whole bunch of people who were food experts. And we haven't looked back. And we rebranded because Fisheye and food agency don't really work. We rebranded as Nourish, and we haven't looked back.
No, it's been amazing to watch, and I know from different time and different approach, but from having had a test kitchen myself, I know how difficult that can be sometimes because there's a cycle of when people are investing in recipes and
Mm-hmm.
media, and when they're pulling back and doing other things and keeping a team busy and having that momentum is. Yeah, it takes a lot of effort and strategy. So congratulations on all the success with that.
Thanks. I will say though, I mean, it was sort of an act 3 for me. I admire entrepreneurs who do this while they still have a young family, while they still have a mortgage. I was at a point in my career where I didn't have to worry about those things anymore. My kids
Nice.
were launched. I, was financially secure, and I had a husband who was also working. So, I don't celebrate my journey as much as I would others because, my risk was not that great.
That's humble of you, but regardless, the entrepreneurship journey it's difficult. There's often not a roadmap. It's very iterative. There's lots of testing and learning, and I'm sure it took a toll as well. So
You don't sleep as well.
yeah,
That's what I've learned.
and
I'm never going to
there's
get
no one
great
to
sleep
blame.
scores. Yeah.
So we're coming together today because, Saturday's International Women's Day, and I put out a few blog posts about, what it's like for me to have been in this industry now for 25 plus years, having started as a chef and been in media, and then having, an entrepreneurial business vaguely similar to the one that you run now, and then moving into the corporate and now that economic development space. And people seem to be kind of interested about it, but I have to say I sometimes, and I think this was in one of my blog posts, I sometimes feel a little bit, um, I guess you'd call it imposter syndrome about, kind of flying the International Women's Day flag. I feel like my mom, who, was in the 60s, standing waiting for the bus in her miniskirt and go-go boots because you were expected to dress a certain way, look a certain way, and, go to the job and come home and do all the things, but still not actually be allowed to go to the bank and get a loan or even, get a bank account without her husband's signature. I sort of feel like in some ways we get to, you and I, kind of take the credit for the people of our mom's generations. Like, how do you feel about International Women's Day?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, for me, I'm quite emotional and passionate about it because I'm a child of the '60s. So I do feel like I've ridden on the shoulders of past generations, and it's important to celebrate and acknowledge the fights to get where we have gotten here. Do I think we would have gotten further by now? Absolutely, right? There's that stat that there's more big American companies run by CEOs with the first name of John or Dave than there are women, right? Like,
Yeah.
that's crazy. Canadian women still make, 84 cents on the dollar, and all of those things. But for me, I mean, yes, there's been progress, and there's work that remains, but like, we weren't declared persons in this country until 1929. It was only 2 years before I was born that all women in Canada had the right to vote.
Which
I
is
was insane,
mind-boggling, right?
right?
That we're, you and I aren't dinosaurs. We were both born
No,
in the 60s and
yeah,
will work, I hope, for quite a few more years. And yet that is so close to our almost, existence.
yeah, yeah. I was in university before the rights of women were enshrined in the Constitution, and
Mhm.
we still have not had an elected female prime minister.
No, it's true. And it isn't looking good for this next round either, unfortunately.
Right. Well, we had Kim Campbell, but she wasn't elected. And even if,
No,
Chrystia Freeland, she still wouldn't be an elected prime minister. So,
true. She'd
uh,
go through that process.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, we've had, we have these dynastic types of last names that turn up over and over again along male lineage lines. Yeah, it's an interesting thing because, you and I have, I think both, we've had high profile careers. We haven't necessarily accomplished things that other women who don't get asked the same questions as you and I do as frequently. There's many who've done lots of other really hard things and don't kind of get recognized. But yet I still think, and it's interesting, I still think that um, there's kind of work to do. I've been a little bit. I don't have a daughter. I only have a son. I know you have of both gendered children in your family, and but my friends who do have daughters who are in their late teens to even early 30s, it shocks me that there's because of social media, there is still so much pressure on women to spend more. Like I mentioned my mom with, the go-go boots and the hair and all that stuff in the 60s, that, she couldn't leave the house without all that and be credible in her workplace. But even if the workplace is kinder, it doesn't seem like society is kinder to women. And probably even, truthfully, I mean, I put on lipstick for this webinar, so I guess I'm part of it too, right? So I don't know if we didn't talk about this question, but as the mother of young women, yeah, what kind of breaks your heart, and what do you wish they had right now that they don't?
I'm lucky that both my daughters grew up in a time before social media was around. Like, I cannot imagine, and I have a granddaughter now who's going to be 5 on April 1st.
She's
Um,
35. Oh my God, where did the time go?
I know, eh?
Wow.
And I have a grandson who's 3. So, yeah, time flies. As you get older, it goes faster. It really does. But I'm thankful that, my 2 daughters didn't grow up in that time, because it's mind blowing. And, you see kids getting Botox, like, and
I
surgeries,
did not. Oh,
cosmetic surgeries, and like, it's just, this is
so
wrong.
I thought my coughing was in better shape, but you shocked me so badly.
Sorry.
I had not heard that children were getting Botox.
Well, like, children as in 18, like,
Yeah,
yeah,
that's crazy. Yeah.
it's creepy, but there's this expectation, and I think it's because of social media, right? And
Mm,
yeah, yeah, I'm not sure social media has done anybody many favors, but especially women, right?
yeah. So we talked a little bit about, well, you talked about how you started your entrepreneurial journey from this relative, safe space. You mentioned that your husband, was working at the time. You had that cushion. But now I know he's retired, and I think he's at least invited you to join him. I don't know, how forceful he is in that opinion, but you continue to want to work. And so what does work mean for you? And is it part of, um, is it part of your identity, or is it just part of your goals, or do you just love what you do? Like, what's your relationship with work?
Yeah. Um, I think it's less, it is part of my identity and part of my well-being and also part of my happiness, but I don't think it's this, it's part of my identity in the same way that it has been with a male. And you gave me a heads up about, you asked if you could ask about my
Yeah,
husband
because
being
it's quite
retired.
personal. I'm talking
Yeah.
asking a question about your
No, which
marriage.
is, and but when you asked that, it kind of got me thinking, because does he ask me to retire? Yes, all the time. I think he's starting to give up, but my husband's 8 years older than me. So, and he had a crazy, I had a crazy career. He had a crazier career. He was an M&A lawyer.
Yeah, yeah.
So, he missed out on a lot of things with the kids growing up. He's getting a little bit more of that now. He can spend more time than me with the grandkids. Uh, but when you asked that question, I thought, you know what? Like, if the roles had been reversed, as they often are, if the woman had retired first,
Yeah,
nobody would be asking the
exactly.
husband when, but I get asked constantly by friends and family, constantly. And then it's like they almost give their condolences to my husband. So there is
Because he's
a,
left alone or because he has to carry
yeah,
the
yeah,
burden.
it's sort of like, yeah, and he jokes about being house husband. He's not. He's doing his fair share now. Right? He actually does some cooking. But yeah, does he do 50%? Maybe, but he didn't in the past. But I've surrounded myself with a more senior team so I can go on 2 weeks vacation with him and take more vacation. But retirement's not for everybody. And there's also good research saying that a couple, you shouldn't both retire at the same time, right? Because you
Yeah.
need to
Well,
discover, get your own rhythm, get your own, like, retirement isn't a group activity. I don't think that's healthy for a marriage or a partnership either. So, with my husband, he really needed, because he had such an all consuming career. It was either he was, doing family stuff or work stuff. There were no
yeah,
times for
binary.
hobbies or he needs to discover those without me. And yeah. And do
Well,
I
it's
miss out on
interesting
some
because
things with girlfriends? Because most of my friends now are retired. Yes. But I just try to make time to fit everyone in.
which I love. And the reason I wanted to ask you that question is that a lot of my friends, I have a degree in English literature, and so a lot of my friends became teachers. And the last 3 years, bang, 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 bang. I think I maybe have two of them left teaching, and then other friends as well. And they'll ask me. They'll be like, what's your plan? And I'm like, I don't have a plan because it's funny because I'm very lucky that my job has many, many elements that I would want in my hobbies, right? Like I like to
Mhm.
unpuzzle things. I like to fix stuff. I like to build stuff. And with a startup like CFIN and with a membership who's trying to revolutionize and grow their businesses, I get lots of opportunities to do that kind of stuff. And I'm like, well, one, having been an entrepreneur for a long time and being married to an entrepreneur, I can't really afford to do that right now. I don't have a pension like my teacher friends do, and more power to them. But I'm not super jealous of them. I was joking with Ella, she's our administrative specialist, earlier today, and because we were talking about this webinar, and I was reflecting, and about paths and the paths that women choose, and how I personally think now, if it was imposed on me, I wouldn't have been happy with it. But I love to cook. I love cleaning and organizing. I like gardening. Like I would have been a kick-ass housewife. And if I had the economic privilege, I may have chosen to have not worked outside of the home. And I think I could have been like really satisfied. And I think that's really interesting because I know from doing a talk last year in BC at the BC Food Technologists Women's Day event that, yeah, there's a lot of pressure on women to live up to that, working, doing this, doing that. And I don't know. I worry that we're almost tyrannizing ourselves now. We were under the tyranny of the patriarchy for so long, and now, yeah, like to use a phrase from pop culture, like, why can't we just do us and work or retire or not work? And like it does feel like we're still working under a lot of expectations, which I guess is an extension of the conversation about social media. Like, we're not, I don't know, how do you think women can, do you think we can just like give each other a fucking break? I mean, is it
We've
possible,
always been our own toughest critics, right? It's true,
right?
right?
Feels like
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you don't hear the term mean boys,
Yeah, it's true. You don't. And
right?
again, focus group of one, just having one child who is a son. I never had to call a father or mother to come pick their son up from a sleepover because the boys were being mean to each other. I don't know why. I don't have the qualifications to unpuzzle that one, but
Yeah.
in the context of the whole conversation about these expectations and stuff, that also got me thinking and led to a question you and I discussed already about, what are the things in your life that make you feel successful? And we got talking a little bit about sort of talismans and things like that.
Yes.
So I
Yeah.
know you've got something that means something to you in your office.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I don't know. Can you see it back there? I can't totally see.
We can now, yeah. I'm just pointing out for everybody who's
Yeah.
like
So
the
it's
orange
it's
arrow
Veuve
up there.
Clicquot with, and it shows the distance between Nourish, the office here, and where Veuve Clicquot is made, and that usually sits at the front of our office when you come in. And Veuve Clicquot's always been my champagne, and for a reason, because I find the story of the widow, as the brand's
The
known,
Grand
really,
Dame.
yeah, really inspirational, because she was in France in the early 1800s at a time when women couldn't have a bank account.
Yeah,
She was
they
a
were property.
Yeah, she was a widow at 27 and a single mother, and she inherited a small vineyard, and she built it into an empire. And she studied for 4 years, learning the business. She talked her father in law into investing her future inheritance into her, right? And she had this whole vision, which was quite amazing. Like, it was towards the end of the Napoleonic Wars, and she saw that the Russia was going to be a future market once that stopped.
Nailed it.
She smuggled the product into Amsterdam, so she was ready to jump as soon as the war ended. So she was first into Russia. She got the original influencer in the Tsar. She got the product into his hands. He said, "This is my only champagne." So of course the whole Russian court
Yeah.
started drinking Veuve.
And that's how champagne and caviar became linked together too,
Yes,
right? Was
yes.
through that story.
Absolutely.
I
And
love
she
that.
came up, and she was also, from a tech standpoint, really innovative in terms of the riddling table, right? To get rid of
Yeah.
the sediment. And it took 15 years for any other, I think Moet was the next one to figure it out, but it took 15 years for him to figure out how she did it.
Yeah.
And yet she had this whole workforce. So how did she keep that secret for so long? It was because she had profit sharing with her employees. So they
Yeah.
were
They were all
incredibly,
invested.
right? They were incredibly loyal to her. So, I find her story, a real inspiration. And if I can I wrote it down because
Yeah,
she
please go
talks
ahead. I love
about,
this.
she wrote something to her grandchildren. And she said, "The world is in perpetual motion, and we must invent the things of tomorrow." And I think, as a female entrepreneur, that's kind of what I strive for. And so that's why
I love that.
yeah, it's
So
always been my champagne.
just over here on my whiteboard, I have a quote written. This present moment used to be the unimaginable future. Kind of similar, right? And I
Yeah.
love that because so often, yeah, so often we get caught up in the that's not possible. And that story that you just told, I think is great. And I love that your that talisman that kind of keeps you grounded and keeps you moving is such a great story. Mine's not quite as big picture as yours, but it's funny. Um over the years, I've been, I think because of how public facing so much of my career has been, the time I spent on TV and stuff, um, I have naturally been, invited to apply for awards and things of that nature. And I've had profiles written about me in magazines and things, which has all been very exciting and made me feel very, very proud. But I felt sort of meaningless in some ways, or felt didn't feel like it felt like it came to me because of the fact that I just happened to be a very, very public person. But I do have something that I wear almost every day, and that's this little, faux jewelry kind of disco ball. And this reminds me of, doing the things that you really care about and doing them as well as you can, because I was able to buy this little bauble in about 1993 or so. I was had top grades at chef school for my class. Not a very big class, so it's again contextualizing, and it came with a small cash prize. And I was working at a really well-known Toronto restaurant at the time. It was called Pronto, and right across the street was this wacky little tiny vintage store called This Bead Goes On. And I went in there and I saw this and I was like, oh, I really like that, and bought it with that prize money, and never thought that, 30 some odd years later, I'd still be wearing it. But every time I'm like, yeah, I can do hard things. Every time I put this on, which is almost daily, I'm like, yeah, I can do hard things. And it's funny because, it's not the car or the house or, some of these things that I think people think that matter to people. I think maybe this doesn't even align with female versus male. Maybe if we spoke to men, a lot of those trappings, the Rolexes and all that stuff wouldn't be as meaningful to them as maybe society kind of makes it look. I don't know. I haven't talked to enough people about it, but I appreciate you having the conversation with me.
Yeah, no, I love that. You mentioned an interesting conversation that you had with your husband recently about exceeding expectations. Care to share that?
Yeah. So I, like everyone, have a birthday every year, and my birthday's in July. So I was sitting at a dinner table. My dad and stepmom took my husband and I out for my birthday to a really nice restaurant. And we were sitting there, and my dad just kind of out of the blue said, it's just amazing. Like you've done such great things. You've just really exceeded all my expectations. And I just rolled with it. I was like, oh yeah, thanks, Dad. My husband got so upset. He's like, what do you mean she exceeded your expectations? And so one, this highlighted a generational thing, but two, it really, like sort of the conditioning. Like when I finished university with this degree in English, my dad was like, well, go to law school. Well, why don't you go to teachers college? Why don't you, well, what about being a realtor? Like all these I wasn't sciencey enough for him to say nurse, but all the female-y kinds of things. And instead I was like, yeah, no, I'm going to chef school. And which blew him away. Is like, you've got an Ivy League education and you're going to trade school. But anyway, long story short, that was its own thing. But I thought it was just so interesting that for me, that was a compliment. And I've been trying to unpack it ever since, and yet for my husband, it was just like, how could you ever put a restriction on someone, and obviously the same someone. And yeah, I still haven't quite figured out where that sort of lies. And I haven't blamed my dad for it because it came from a good place. But it's true, even in the 80s, and I was, had good grades and had the gift of the gab and got into, a good university and all that stuff. And yet still nobody ever expected me to do hard things.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. We are so much a product of our upbringing,
yeah.
And we overcome that, right? I think we spend the rest of our lifetime overcoming that. And when we're also being mothers, we're also trying to correct for that, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
true story. Did you ever have, sort of a similar kind of a thing where you went, oh yeah, I'm not what people expected me to be,
Mm.
or is it, or did you come from a more sort of like less encumbered kind of background?
Okay. Well, uh, my mother died quite young, so she never had a chance to see my
That's too bad.
career. Yeah. But she was, and I was the first one on either side of my family to to go to university.
Me
Um,
too.
yeah, yeah. So, and she was very smart. But she didn't have that opportunity. She had a scholarship that her family made her turn down and all that. So she never went. So she always, we were always, and I have two younger brothers. So the three of us were always, it was a given we were going to university. And it was a given she really instilled in all of us that we could do anything. So there was that. But when it came to university, in her mind, I was going for my MRS degree, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And
Uh,
for those who are too young, maybe on the call, when we went to school in the 80s, yeah, the MRS was the I'm going to university to find a husband. It stands for Mrs. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And I went to Queens in the
So
early
did I.
80s.
Like, yes,
Yeah.
I didn't. Were we there at the same time?
I don't know. Is there an
I was.
81? When were you there?
Oh yeah, I was in '89, so a little bit
Yeah,
behind.
so we didn't quite cross, but I remember I stayed, my dorm was Adelaide, and my
Yeah,
floor, you got
they had the
twinned
best lunches.
with, yes, we got twinned with a brother floor. And my floor decided that no, they didn't want those losers because, they weren't. So they wrote protocol and, they figured out where the MBAs were staying, and that became our brother floor. It's just like, crazy. So like that
Wow.
MRS thing was really ingrained. But a quick story about my upbringing, and being sort of a child of the 60s and 70s and how that really imprints on you. So we used to go to Fern Resort. Some of you may know it
Oh,
in
I love
Aurelia.
furniture. Yeah.
Yeah, so that was sort of our place. Every year we would meet up with families from all over, from the U.S. and from different places, and we'd have the same week, and we'd go there.
Love
And
traditions like that.
yeah, yeah, it was a lovely tradition. And there was that little small golf course. I think it was like a 6-hole golf course. I've always been an early riser. And so, this one morning, the dads invited me along on their round of golf, right? So, cigar smoke, they're having a great game. And I was feeling like pretty grown up. I think I was like 12 or something. And
Amazing.
then the moms would, play, right? And leave the kids with the dads. And so I got invited to golf with them as well. So I thought, like, I'm really crossing this
Interesting.
threshold into adulthood, right? And my mom was a stay-at-home mom, but the other moms in this foursome, there's Mrs. Wright, and she taught Stevie Wonder. She was a teacher for the blind.
Wow.
Mrs. Harvat, she was an entrepreneur. Mrs. Sargent was an entrepreneur. She had a chain of stores and everything. So these were really interesting women. And my dad was just this natural athlete. He was on the national rugby team. He could
Oh, wow.
anything he touched. He was just a born athlete.
Opposite
And
of
my
me, yeah, natural klutz. Yeah.
yeah, and my mom had grace, but she was no golfer. But on this day, this round, she had the perfect round. And like she was sinking everything and we get to the final hole. And I know what my dad shot. And I know that my mom is about to beat his score, which is like unheard of. And so I wait for it to go into the hole. And I am just ready to run back. I'm doing a little happy dance. And my
Yeah.
mom just says, just shut it down. This is
Wow.
our little secret. You do not tell anybody.
Don't
You
want to make the
never
boys feel bad.
embarrass the men in your life. You just never, like, it's not ladylike.
Interesting.
And I turned to the other women expecting them to back me up, and they didn't.
Yeah.
And they agreed with her. It's like you can't upstage the men in your life. And that
I
was
hope
just,
that generationally that has changed. I mean,
oh,
you always want to be kind, right? But at the same time, I do hope that, particularly in a sport like golf, where your gender really doesn't
yeah.
matter in the same way it does.
And this was just a one-off occurrence, but it was like, why couldn't we have celebrated it and said, hey, way to go,
Yeah,
mom, right? Like, but it was like a non-starter. And I think that that really kind of stuck with me. And so, um, I've got two daughters and a son, and I've made sure that, my daughters have been raised to be as loud and as proud as my son, I hope, right? And
that's
same with
great.
my granddaughter and grandson. But yeah, is that it's really tough to, and you still hear what is bravado in a male is bragging in a female. What's,
And what's assertive in a man is aggressive in a woman, and I have
right?
had that um, pop up many times in my career, and I found it until I had kind of read articles that broke that down. I found it hurtful when people said that that I was aggressive, and it now that I think about it quite differently, but at the time it was stifling. It did, it didn't hold me back for very long, but um, it in different circumstances it might have.
Yeah. And it wasn't how you were projecting, it was how the other side was
There, that,
receiving,
yeah,
right? Yeah. And that's what needed to change.
great,
Yeah.
great. Yeah, it's very interesting. I could obviously continue having these kind of conversations on and on, but I do know that some people took some time to send us questions, and Lavina, our amazing, regional innovation director for British Columbia, she's going to join us, and she's going to ask questions, hopefully answer some of them too, and we'll kind of move into that phase of things. So, Lavina, if you're able to, oh, there she is. Hello, Lavina,
Awesome.
in beautiful
Oh,
sunny British Columbia, where I'm very envious. For those of you who don't know, I'm in Ontario today in Dufferin County. Jo-Ann's downtown Toronto, where it is like really cold and vile. And Lavina told us she has daffodils blooming. So we
Yeah.
still like her, but I'm
Yeah.
jealous.
yes. I heard something about, Fool's Spring or something, so I'm really hoping it's not that and this is actual spring.
Well, yes, I hope so too. And I hope we're fast on your heels.
Yeah.
So, what have you got for us,
We
Lavina?
do. Yeah, we did a call out for questions prior to the event, and we had lots of great questions. So I'll just jump right in. So the first one we have here is I've got 15 years of experience in the food industry, specifically in food science and chemistry, and I feel like I've got really strong credentials. I've connected with Canadian professionals to exchange insights over the past 2 years, but given the current job situation here, what's your suggestion on how I can best leverage my expertise to advance my career?
Yeah, it's so interesting. That goes back to that point I was trying to make about how, some people do have big aspirations. Other people, find their joy and their satisfaction. Other things. This is obviously somebody who wants to advance, and it's yeah, it's an interesting question because I think that generally speaking, your skills are important. Like obviously you need to have, the qualification to do things, but for me, I think the fact that I was just always really enthusiastic and available, that's why I got opportunities, and sometimes opportunities that maybe I didn't even really deserve as much as somebody who was maybe a little more reticent. Like I've just always been like, what are you doing? Oh, wow, that's cool. How could I learn about that? What could I do to help? So for me, I guess it's been sort of like, keenness. What about you, Jo-Ann? How would you, you know,
Yeah,
what
I think
your mind when you do it?
the modern day version of that is being present and sharing knowledge on LinkedIn. I think that's really a place, you've got these
Mhm.
skills and knowledge and show that passion, that curiosity, but also that thought leadership and, you know, willingness to share, to question, and have conversation in LinkedIn. I think that's a place where you
LinkedIn
really,
is really powerful. Lavina,
yeah.
you're really good on LinkedIn. I don't think you used it a lot before you joined CFIN. Have you found that I would say you probably post it more than once a week, but for sure once a week you do your High Five Friday for sure. Has it changed the type of inbound that you get by being more present there?
I think so. And I think for me to really understand that concept of like personal brand, which I think, as a food scientist, I agree, like it's really not something you think about often, maybe unless you're on the marketing side. But I do think that thinking about what your personal brand might be, whether it's more scientific or whether it's more in a certain category, food category or knowledge or something like that, it's definitely a tool that someone who's actively trying to advance their career could start to leverage and think about what's your personal brand and how do you want to show up. And a platform like LinkedIn is a great place to do that.
And it's
Yeah,
also
when I was
a place where recruiters hang out. Like we used to, and throughout my career, I always used recruiters. We haven't used a recruiter in quite some time.
Yeah. No, well, they're
Right? Thanks
very
to
expensive,
LinkedIn.
and LinkedIn makes it easier. When I was doing research for that speech that I gave last year at the BC Food Technologist event, where you were the MC, Lavina, one of the things I did come across is that women do get internally judged on what people for promotions and accelerations and new projects. They get judged on what people already know they can do, like, oh yeah, she's done that before. Whereas men get more often, the language that is used is that they more often is like, oh yeah, they could do that. So I think if you coupled what Jo-Ann said with on your resume and on your LinkedIn posts talking about a situation and saying, you know, and doing it in a way that isn't, too aggressive, I guess, or bashing people over the head with it, but say, da da da, I just accomplished X, Y, Z. I'm so excited because this is a stepping stone towards being able to do these kinds of things. If you're doing those kinds of things and want to chat, ping me. So I think the call to action packaging on LinkedIn is probably important too for somebody who feels a bit stalled. Would you two agree?
Yeah, and Dana, that there's that. I think you're probably referring to the research out there that says even when candidates apply for jobs, right? Men go for a job if they've got kind of 60% of the
Yeah,
qualifications, and women only
same
apply
research.
if they've got 100% of the qualifications, right? So, as mentors, as employers, we really need to somehow correct for that and nudge the women forward to
Yeah.
try to, reach a little further than they feel comfortable.
Mhm.
Yeah, and to really position themselves as um, having the skills and the capability to do the hard things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was a
And I'd
great question.
also,
Thanks to whoever sent that in.
yeah, I'd also add to just sometimes shifting your perspective on the types of jobs or companies that you're looking at. I know a lot of us in the food industry, we seem to think like the ideal jobs are with those really big established CPG companies. And if you're only looking at those companies to try to get in or advance your career, it can be limiting. And that's why I feel, organizations like CFIN or just having a browse on our Yodel platform, especially, and have a look at startups, right? That might be a different kind of category of company to look at because sometimes advancement within a startup could be actually a lot faster and you get to wear lots of different hats.
Mhm.
So yeah, my advice to this person even maybe shift perspective
Mix
and
it up.
searching and looking at different types of companies like startups.
Yeah, that's a great point. So, any other questions?
Yeah, well, speaking of startups, here's the next question. Some women entrepreneurs have great business ideas, but are unable to pursue them due to financial constraints and other challenges. What opportunities can we offer to support them and to turn their ideas into reality?
Yeah, the Sandy Mark from the Canadian Small Processors Association, I think it's called. I've had conversations with her about this because they actually have a program, because when it comes to this question is focused on like getting started, but once women do start businesses and they do have some traction, the investment that they attract, even at Series A, like in seed, not even talking about at the scaling stage, the stats are just like whoosh. And so they have a program to help women to, to get prepared for that kind of thing. But for me, my entrepreneurial impulse, I started working from home, to be honest, and I worked around other things, and I was fortunate that I could secure, things like a gig being a food editor for, for magazines that, was a few days a week, so that I had sort of some anchor stuff. But before I did that, I way back in the day, I worked at Canadian Living as a test kitchen associate, and I did freelance writing. And I got, I just kept nurturing that. And it was hard. I'm not going to say it was, that it gave me work-life balance, but I just built up my client base until it was at the point where I knew if I had more time for it, I could grow it more. And that's when I quit my day job. So I did side hustle until side hustle grew to the point where it had enough traction that that it could, that it seemed likely that it would be okay. And I did put money aside and had sort of a nest egg, because at the time I was, wanting to become a mom and that kind of thing. And the entrepreneurial lifestyle is still really hard for women who are in that stage of having children, because there's no mat leave. And truthfully, I did start working, not a lot, but I did start working, a couple of half days a week when my son was only about 12 weeks old. And that's something that Canada, we've got such great parental supports in so many ways, but the entrepreneurial parental supports are still really lacking.
I'd say entrepreneurial support period is lacking compared to other
Yeah.
countries. Yeah. There's also some mentorship programs that are paid by, like, I know the Scotiabank has a paid mentorship program. I saw something the other day went by my desk about Visa having grants for aspiring entrepreneurs or starting out, $10,000, but $10,000 when you're starting out is, a good little nest egg. So those mentorship programs, I think, are really important if you can be paired with somebody who's done it before and can kind of give you some shortcuts along the way.
Yeah, it's hard to bootstrap when you're when you don't have a bank account or somebody, somebody there with that support. So I sympathize, but I love that people have that entrepreneurial spirit, because I think it's in this moment it feels very Canadian to want to be self-sufficient and after yourself and explore your ideas. Yeah. Yes,
I feel like
exactly.
we're seeing a lot of that. Yeah, buy Canadian and the retailers. And I was going to add to this question that I think, if there's any kind of retailers on the call, I think there's a big role that they can play as well to help promote women-led brands or women-founded companies and just really accentuate that market visibility. So once you've got good mentorship, as has been mentioned, and you get the company, the bones of the company and the business plan up to speed, how can we help promote those women-led brands out in the marketplace? And that's where I think market visibility becomes really important about, doing like displays or something in store or something like that, that can really then drive that awareness and help kind of move those brands.
Yeah, it's interesting. This conversation reminds me, I was really fortunate to be good friends with Renee Unger, who was Renee's Gourmet. And Renee was a school teacher, and she started making soup, not salad dressing, but soup in her garage. They turned it into, a food safe space. And so she did it mostly during the summer at first, and again, as a side hustle. Eventually, caught on to that fresh salad dressing thing and got herself into meat buyers, and she was so passionate and so into it, and convinced them to change the way the produce aisle was set up. You didn't used to have packaged foods of any kind in the produce aisle till Renee got them to put the dressing next to the salad ingredients. And again, even though she ended up selling that business to Heinz for tens of millions of dollars, again, it was a side hustle, and she did all those things, and did it from home. And so I guess I would just say, temper your expectations if you don't have a lot of money to go in and go big, and just set some small milestones, and keep iterating, and testing and learning, and yeah, take it. It's a long journey. Take it one step at a time.
Great. All right. Next question, and this one I think comes up quite often, which is, how do you approach salary negotiations, the gender pay gap, and advocating for yourself in today's kind of workplace and historically male-dominated space?
That's a really good question, and
Yeah.
a hard one. Yeah, I don't think I've necessarily been very good at that naturally, and I think I probably have left money on the table at various times in my career. But I did take, when I was leading the entrepreneurial life, I found it really uncomfortable to negotiate. So I took this 1 day or 2 day negotiation seminar, and most of the people who were in it were like salespeople who worked for companies, and the guy who was leading it, I can picture the moment even. He kind of called me out because I guess I had on a sour face, and I'm like, well, I just, this isn't working for me. All these people are selling widgets and stuff, and I'm selling my what's in here, and basically myself, my personal brand, because I was doing a lot of spokesperson work in those days. And he said to me, well, would you do this stuff for free? And I said, no. He goes, well, then you're selling something. He's like, figure it out. What's it worth? Put the price on it, and don't apologize for it. Best advice I ever got.
Yep. I'd say we often get emotional about salary. It's hard not to, especially if we don't think we're being paid what we're worth. But I would try to keep it as fact-based as possible. There are lots of salary benchmarks that are available out there. So arm yourself with that, and make sure that you have your accomplishments and how you've contributed, and make sure you're positioning that in a way that you're taking credit for it. It's about you, not the team, when you're negotiating salary. I would also recommend doing some role playing, and maybe you did as well in your negotiation class, Dana. And I would recommend you role play. You go through the meeting with your boss and role play with a male, not a female. Role play with a man, because he'll call you out on certain things that a woman wouldn't. And they go in. I've had both sides come in asking for more money. It's a very different approach, and it shouldn't be.
Yeah.
So yeah, that would be my recommendation.
Yeah, no, those are good recommendations, and always remember, you can't grow it up, right? So the same way you would negotiate for your business, when you're negotiating for yourself, like, if you want 100,000, ask for 110, because then you can walk it back. No one's gonna say, oh yeah, you asked for 100, well, we're gonna give you 105. They're just not, because it's literally their job not to do that.
Yeah, and the best time, if you're accepting a job, the best time to ask for a salary increase versus what they're offering is once they've made you the offer, right? You've got a sweet spot there where there's probably some give, and yeah, you want to join a company at the highest that you can as well.
Yeah, that's very true.
All right, well, we're approaching the end of the hour, so maybe one last question. What's an unexpected challenge that you've faced as a woman in the food industry, and how did you overcome it?
Most challenges are unexpected for me, so that's quite a long list.
Hmm. There's not one that comes to mind, but I will say it was a lesson I had to learn when I was at Molson. And I worked for Dan O'Neill, who, if anybody remembers, he was voted the worst boss in Canada at one point. He was a tough SOB, may rest in peace. And, I was on the North American management team for Molson. And so in the boardroom, a bunch of beer guys, and, this was 20 years ago, swearing, yelling, pounding tables. Like it was just like full on
Like
argument.
madmen.
It really was swearing, you name it. And then as soon as the guys crossed the threshold of the boardroom door, they'd hit each other on their back, and they'd say, "Hey, let's go grab a beer in the pub." It was like they turned it like it stayed there. And as the female in the, I was still like feeling emotionally wounded from those conversations. And I'd watch this and think, and you know what? I learned to separate business from, it's not personal, right? And so those yelling matches in the boardroom, not that I condone that behavior, and I think that hopefully we've moved past that now. And when I thought about that, it's the same way, like men and women, we are conditioned differently or wired differently as well. Like I'd see it in personal relationships. So if my husband got a call from a friend that he hadn't talked to in like 6 months, he would be, "Hey, it's great to hear from you, da da da." Same thing happens to me. I'm like wounded. Like, where have you been? Why haven't, right? So I saw that in my personal life as well, right? Rather than just being able to say, "Hey, this is great news," or, this is business, move on. So I think that was a really important lesson for me to learn.
That's yeah, I can relate to a lot of what you just said. I think, unexpected challenges. Yeah, I think sometimes, people expecting that because of your circumstances that you wouldn't be interested in things is probably one of the most wounding types of things that I face. It's like, oh, well, your husband works evenings because my husband's a chef and a restaurateur, and oh, you've got a young kid, so we didn't ask you because we knew it wouldn't. And I'd be like, well, do me the dignity of asking, and so I guess for me the challenge of people's assumptions maybe has been a recurring thing that's like, yeah, you know what, like you almost wish in some ways that people didn't know so much about you because that clouds maybe what they think your interests would be. So
Thank you. We actually had one question submitted right at the buzzer. So if you don't mind, maybe
the lightning round.
yeah. So this question was, we talked a little bit about, a food entrepreneurship, and if someone were to kind of want to grow their side hustle into maybe a full-fledged business, we know how important distributors and retailers and kind of finding them and making that connection. Any advice on like how to do that more effectively? How does that all work? Is there kind of a
Well,
30
that's a
second?
question for a regional innovation director, if ever I heard one. I guess the short answer is, ask lots of questions, use tools like Yodel and LinkedIn. But
Perfect. Great. Well, that kind of wraps up all of our submitted questions. Dana, I'll turn it over to you to
thank you.
wrap us up.
Well, we're right at time. Jo-Ann, you've been so generous to be here at all, and then you've just been so forthcoming and just kind of, so transparent, and I really appreciate it. I enjoyed our conversation immensely. I hope other people benefited from it. But yeah, you've given me good food for thought too. So I really, on this Women's Day week, I appreciate you being in my network and being there. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And just a shout out to you and all the other women, make sure you take some time for yourself, right? They tell us to put our oxygen mask on first when we're on an airplane. We need to do more of that in our own lives, right?
Yeah.
Take care of ourselves, take care of our bodies as if it were our best friend, right? because it is.
And that is a great way to end. Thank you so much. Really
Thank
grateful
you.
for you and all this time. Bye, everybody. Have a great afternoon.